So I think it turns out that almost all of the Agile proponents' criticisms of traditional project management really turn out to be criticisms of doing projects in a waterfall or a sequential life cycle approach. And waterfall means that we're going to divide our project again up into a set of sequential phases. The term was first coined in 1970 by Winston Royce, did a presentation, wrote an article at that time. And the irony is that actually in this article, Mr. Royce was criticizing the waterfall method, but actually, so today it's called Winston Royce's waterfall method. So the waterfall method, this is how we did software applications back in the old days. Yes, COBOL, baby. This is how I did COBOL database applications back in the 70s. Many customers of mine at Hewlett-Packard were using this method in the 80s, and I think some people are still using it today. They might want to wake up and start looking at some other things. We'll see. So anyway, how did we do things back then? So we broke up the project into these sequential phases, and they're going to flow in this nice waterfall fashion. The main idea is we have to completely finish and wrap up a preceding phase before we start the next phase. So the conceptual phase, this is all about going and defining our high-level requirements for the project, get user requirements, get high-level functional specifications, get that documented, get that all nice and tidy and neat, wrap it up into a functional spec, and it might take us more than a month, a couple of months or longer to acquire those high-level functional specs and user requirements. But we get it all packaged up, we tie a bow around it, and then we hand it down to the people working on the next phase, the detailed design specs. And this is all about taking our functional specs and breaking things, decomposing, going into a lot more detail, and figuring out the system architecture, breaking down the application in a modular top-down way from applications into programs, programs into modules, modules into paragraphs, and perhaps even smaller pieces, define the file layouts, define the database schema, and put together this subsystem spec. And of course that could take a couple of months at least to get that done, or longer. You get that all nice and neat, you tie a bow around that, and you hand that off down to the next team, the programmers doing the development, writing the code. So they take your file layouts, they take your high-level specs of the different programs and their modules, and they write code against it, and they might take 6 months, they might take 9 months to write all their code, get it past, get that ready, put it into unit testing, start unit testing. That might take a couple of months or a significant amount of time. Get that all nice and neat, and then we're ready to put and plug everything in together and do integrated testing, and then of course that can take a couple of months. So what's wrong with this? This oftentimes, I think in software projects today, they say there's an incredibly high failure rate. Gartner Group studies have shown that something as high as over 70% of projects today fail to meet some key customer constraints and requirements, scope, quality, schedule, or budget. We're going to fail to meet one of those key constraints. And largely it's due to using this waterfall method. So what's gone wrong? Why does this fail? So what's the main problem with this? How long is it before the customer actually gets to see the application and use it and test it and kick the tires? Well, it can be a year or longer. In the scenario that we just described, it might be 18 months, but other times it's even longer than that. And what's happened? In that time, the world hasn't stopped, and their requirements have kept changing. New technologies arise that they want to take advantage of. They are growing as a corporation. Other things are happening. Their requirements are changing. Also, more fundamentally, it's not until they get to really use and see and test this application that oftentimes they truly understand what their requirements were in the first place. It's also not until they get to see and use this application and test it that we find out, we learn if we were really on the right page with them from the beginning when we obtained their requirements. Did we truly understand their requirements? Oftentimes we're going to hear comments like, no, this isn't it. This isn't what I meant. You weren't listening. Therefore, you're going to have some big issues. Typically in Waterfall, again, we're going to fail to meet one of these key constraints, and we're going to need to add scope requirements, change scope requirements, and of course that's going to mean schedule delays, cost overruns, quality issues, poor customer satisfaction, and of course that's going to lead to a new project manager. So how does using Agile, one of our Agile methodologies, how is it going to allow us to solve this problem, the pitfalls of the waterfall method that we were just describing? Well, in essence, I think it kind of boils down to this. We're not going to try to build the perfect cake, plan out the perfect recipe right at the very beginning. We're not going to go to extraordinary lengths to figure everything out in detail up front and build the perfect cake. And instead, we're going to allow the perfect cake to emerge through repetitive or iterative prototypes, through successive prototypes of building the cake. Let the customer test out different versions, see what they want and what they don't want, and then just keep adding on to this as we go through. So we need a very empowered product owner. So for PMI's terms, I guess that would be the sponsor. But for this case, where we're trying to create something new, we're not really sure up front what we want. We know the requirements are going to be changing and are going to be very malleable. We need a very empowered person, this product owner, that can choose and define. Maybe it's a team, the product owner team, but we need some empowerment to define what are the core features, what are the core requirements that should go into this product. And we're going to call that set of features the product backlog. And then we'll pick the initial subset of these that we will focus on and attack in our first prototype, our first iteration. And we will start developing that. We need a very empowered team that will be working on that. So ideally, this should include a team of 7 or 8, perhaps 9 team members. They're all working at the same site, so they're all co-located. They're dedicated to this project. We need them to be dedicated, not multitasking, splitting their time between other project work, other activities in this. Again, we need a very high energy, high-performing team to do that. So we need this co-location. They need to be working together closely on this. The project manager is going to have a different role. The project manager, the scrum master, is going to work more as a facilitator, just ensuring that this high-energy, high-performance team has what they need and ensures that there are no impediments that block their way. Okay, so we create our initial subset of requirements or features, this initial backlog for the first sprint. We bring in the customer, and the customer gets to see something right away. And this is key. They get to kick the tires, so to speak, of this core feature set that's been included. And they're going to review that, and we're either going to give it the thumbs up or the thumbs down. This is, we're either going to go back to the drawing board and start over again, or we're going to identify what we really need and what we don't need. And then we'll figure out, we'll go through this review and adaptive phase, and we'll figure out the features for the next iteration, for the next prototype. So we do that, we choose the requirements, the feature set, the backlog for the next iteration, we create that, and we keep iteratively going, looping through this, building out the prototype over time, and the customer ends up, this is a much more efficient way of letting the requirements, of letting the features emerge. So I think you can see why this is going to be much more effective, why this is going to be much more of an efficient process for really drilling down, finding, discovering, learning what the key requirements should be for the customer. First of all, we're quickly getting feedback. We're not waiting that year and a half, where all sorts of things are going to have changed. So we're going to quickly find out what they want. And as Doug DeCarlo says, we can identify fast failures. So we're also quickly learning what they don't want, what's not really core, what's not really important for them. And very quickly we get to see, were we on the same page? Did we truly understand their requirements as they were defining them? Oftentimes, again, as we said, it's not really until the customer gets to see and use and play with things that they also learn what their key core requirements were. So this helps them quickly do that. Oftentimes, as we see in many, many projects, they start out at the very beginning with a very long laundry list of requirements. And then when they get to the actual product and the application, they find out that, many of these requirements really weren't essential at all. So we get to learn that. And again, we just really start targeting and focusing on the core feature set. And we're not going to waste time on non-essential things. And I love this quote from Doug DeCarlo from the Agile people. And basically the quote is, if a picture is worth 1,000 words, then a prototype is worth 1,000 pictures. Again, in being able to actually use and play with and work with the product, they understand in a much more real way what their requirements, what the core features are that they truly need.